Hey guys, so something we're going to do at the beginning of these videos is ground ourselves in the AP rubric. If you see here on this document, it talks about topic 1.5 being state building in Africa. There are topics throughout the AP rubric that will be covered on the exam, and this is one of them. So this is grounding and some of the ways that empires in Africa maintain control over their citizens. And so that's what we'll be studying today. In addition to that, we'll ground ourselves in the historiography of a topic. Historiography, remember, is the texts that have been written about a historical topic. And so when we talk about the historiography of Africa across the ages, this is really significant because Africa, up until about the 2000s, was really left out of the historical narrative. We'll see that in a few of the videos. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that historians started to really push to put more African empires into world history. But even then, it's done through a slightly slanted lens, and that perspective is what we call Eurocentric. It's from a European perspective, meaning we look at Africa through a lens of how Europe impacted Africa. And that's really problematic, so we want to make sure as we jump into today's lesson, we're working to name that Eurocentric lens and try to avoid that lens. So what to take notes over during these videos: you should be writing in your historian's journal, discussing how Mali and Great Zimbabwe maintain control of their empires, and then make sure you are specifically stating it through a SPICE lens, so the social, political, economic, etc. ways that they were able to maintain control over their empires.
Hi, my name is John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about Africa.
Mr. Green, we've already talked about Africa. Egypt is in Africa, and you haven't shut up about it the entire course.
Yeah, that's true of me from the past, but Africa's big. It's like super big, much bigger than it appears on most maps, actually. I mean, you can fit India and China and the United States if you just fold in Maine. All of that fits in Africa. Like any huge place, Africa is incredibly diverse, and it's a mistake to focus just on Egypt. So today, let's go here, south of the Sahara Desert. First, let's turn to written records. Oh, right, we don't have very many, at least not written by sub-Saharan Africans. Much of African history was preserved via oral rather than written tradition. These days, we tend to think of writing as the most accurate and reliable form of description, but then again, we do live in a print-based culture. And we've already said that writing is one of the markers of civilization, implying that people who don't use writing aren't civilized, a prejudice that has been applied over and over again to Africa. But one, if you need evidence that it's possible to produce amazing literary artifacts without the benefit of writing, let me direct your attention to the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were composed and memorized by poets for centuries before anyone ever wrote them down. And two, no less an authority than Plato said that writing destroys human memory by alleviating the need to remember anything. And three, you think oral tradition is uncivilized, but here you are listening to me talk. But we do have a lot of interesting records for some African histories, including the legendary tale of Mansa Musa. And the reason we know a lot about Mali is because it was visited by Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan cleric and scholar who kind of had the best life ever. He was particularly fascinated by gender roles in the Malian Empire and by Malian women, writing, "They are extremely beautiful and more important than the men." Oh, it must be time for the open letter. An open letter to Ibn Battuta. I wonder what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, appears to be some kind of fake beard. Movie magic! Stan, why did you do this to me? Dear Ibn Battuta, bro, I love Twitter and my Xbox and Hawaiian pizza, but if I had to go into the past and live anyone's life, it would be yours. Because you were this outlandishly learned scholar who managed to parlay your knowledge of Islam into the greatest road trip in history. You went from Mali to Constantinople to India to Russia to Indonesia. You were probably the most well-traveled person before the invention of the steam engine. And everywhere you went, you were treated like a king, and then you went home and you wrote a really famous book called The Real that people still read today, and also you could grow a real beard, and I'm jealous. Best wishes, John Green.
If someone asked you who the richest people in history were, who would you name? Perhaps a billionaire banker or corporate mogul like Bill Gates or John D. Rockefeller. How about African King Musa Kita I? Ruling the Mali Empire in the 14th century CE, Mansa Musa, or the King of Kings, amassed a fortune that possibly made him one of the wealthiest people who ever lived. But his vast wealth was only one piece of his rich legacy. When Mansa Musa came to power in 1312, much of Europe was racked by famine and civil wars. But many African kingdoms and the Islamic world were flourishing, and Mansa Musa played a great role in bringing the fruits of this flourishing to his own realm. By strategically annexing the city of Timbuktu and re-establishing power over the city of Gal, he gained control over important trade routes between the Mediterranean and the West African coast, continuing a period of expansion which dramatically increased Mali's size. The territory of the Mali Empire was rich in natural resources, such as gold and salt. The world first witnessed the extent of Mansa Musa's wealth in 1324, when he took his pilgrimage to Mecca. Not one to travel on a budget, he brought a caravan stretching as far as the eye could see. Accounts of this journey are mostly based on an oral testimony and differing written records, so it's difficult to determine the exact details. But what most agree on is the extravagant scale of the excursion. Chroniclers describe an entourage of tens of thousands of soldiers, civilians, and slaves, 500 heralds, bearing gold staffs and dressed in fine silks, and many camels and horses bearing an abundance of gold bars. Stopping in cities such as Cairo, Mansa Musa is said to have spent massive quantities of gold, giving to the poor, buying souvenirs, and even having mosques built along the way. In fact, his spending may have destabilized the regional economy, causing mass inflation. This journey reportedly took over a year, and by the time Mansa Musa returned, tales of his amazing wealth had spread to the ports of the Mediterranean. Mali and its king were elevated to near legendary status, cemented by their inclusion on the 1375 Catalan Atlas. One of the most important world maps of medieval Europe, it depicted the king holding a scepter and a gleaming gold nugget. Mansa Musa had literally put his empire and himself on the map. But material riches weren't the king's only concern. As a devout Muslim, he took a particular interest in Timbuktu, already a center of religion and learning prior to its annexation. Upon returning from his pilgrimage, he had the great Djinguereber Mosque built there with the help of an Andalusian architect. He also established a major university, further elevating the city's reputation and attracting scholars and students from all over the Islamic world. Under Mansa Musa, the empire became urbanized, with schools and mosques in hundreds of densely populated towns. The king's rich legacy persisted for generations, and to this day, there are mausoleums, libraries, and mosques that stand as a testament to this golden age of Mali's history.
Let's move to the other side of Africa, where there was an alternative model of civilizational development. The eastern coast of Africa saw the rise of what historians call Swahili civilization, which was not an empire or a kingdom, but a collection of city-states like Zanzibar and Mombasa and Mogadishu, all of which formed a network of trade ports. There was no central authority. Each of these cities was autonomously ruled, usually, although not always, by a king. But there were three things that linked the city-states such that we consider them a common culture: language, trade, and religion. The Swahili language is part of a language group called Bantu, and its original speakers were from West Africa. Their migration to East Africa changed not only the linguistic traditions of Africa, but everything else, because they brought with them ironwork and agriculture. Until then, most of the people living in the East had been hunter-gatherers or herders, but once introduced, agriculture took hold, as it almost always does, unless, wait for it, you're the Mongols. Modern-day Swahili, by the way, is still a Bantu-based language, although it's been heavily influenced by Arabic.
Stretched across a tree-peppered expanse in southern Africa lies the magnificent ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a medieval stone city of astounding wealth and prestige. Located in the present-day country of Zimbabwe, it's the site of the largest known settlement ruins in sub-Saharan Africa, second on the continent only to the pyramids of Egypt. But the history of this city is shrouded in controversy, defined by decades of dispute about who built it and why. Its name comes from the Shona word Mad Zimbabwe, meaning big house of stone, for its unscalable stone walls that reach heights of nearly 10 meters and run for a length of about 250 meters. For its grandeur and historical significance, it was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. Back in the 14th and 15th centuries, it was a thriving city. Spread across nearly 8 square kilometers, Great Zimbabwe was defined by 3 main areas: the hill complex, where the king lived, the Great Enclosure, reserved for members of the royal family, and the valley complex, where regular citizens lived. Rulers were both powerful economic and religious leaders for the region. At its highest point, the city had a bustling urban population of 18,000 people and was one of the major African trade centers at the time. What enabled this growth was Great Zimbabwe's influential role in an intercontinental trade network. Connected to several key city-states along the East African Swahili coast, it was part of the larger Indian Ocean trade routes. The city generated its riches by controlling the sources and trade of the most prized items: gold, ivory, and copper. With this mercantile power, it was able to extend its sphere of influence across continents, fostering a strong Arab and Indian trader presence throughout its zenith. Archaeologists have since pieced together the details of this history through artifacts discovered on site. There were pottery shards and glassworks from Asia, as well as coins minted in the coastal trading city of Kilwa Kisiwani, over 1,500 miles away. They also found soapstone bird figures, which are thought to represent each of the city's rulers. And young calf bones, only unearthed near the royal residence, show how the diet of the elite differed from the general population. These clues have also led to theories about the city's decline. By the mid-15th century, the buildings at Great Zimbabwe were almost all that remained. Archaeological evidence points to overcrowding and sanitation issues as the cause, compounded by soil depletion triggered by overuse. Eventually, as crops withered and conditions in the city worsened, the population of Great Zimbabwe is thought to have dispersed and formed the nearby Mutapa and Torwa states. Centuries later, a new phase of Great Zimbabwe's influence began to play out in the political realm, as people debated who had built the famous city of stone. During the European colonization of Africa, racist colonial officials claimed the ruins couldn't be of African origin. So, without a detailed written record on hand, they instead relied on myths to explain the magnificence of Great Zimbabwe. Some claimed it proved the Bible story of the Queen of Sheba who lived in a city of riches. Others argued it was built by the ancient Greeks. Then, in the early 20th century, after extensive excavation at the site, the archaeologist David Randall McIver presented clear evidence that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous peoples. Yet, at the time, the country's white minority colonial government sought to discredit this theory because it challenged the legitimacy of their rule. In fact, the government actively encouraged historians to produce accounts that disputed the city's African origins. Over time, however, an overwhelming body of evidence mounted, identifying Great Zimbabwe as an African city built by Africans. During the 1960s and 70s, Great Zimbabwe became an important symbol for the African nationalist movement that was spreading across the continent. Today, the ruins at Great Zimbabwe, alluded to on the Zimbabwean flag by a soapstone bird, still stand as a source of national pride and cultural value.